It's Chelsea,
It's Nina,
and
and
you're
you're
in
in
the
the
Critics
Critics
Kingdom.
Kingdom.
Hello, everyone, and we are back again with another episode of the Critics Kingdom. And this week we are going to be doing a very classic DCOM that came out in 1999, Genius.
Yeah, and Chelsea, we've already talked about how I had a very deep appreciation for this film as a child. I would definitely put it on. I'm not gonna lie, I think I kind of fought for this one a little bit.
Yeah,
For
no,
us
you
to
did when
cover
we were
this one.
coming up with our list because I was
Yeah,
like, genius. Because, fun fact, guys, I don't remember ever seeing this one all the way through until we just watched it to review it. So
yeah,
it did not hold a special place in my heart like it held in Nina's.
yeah. But I fought for this one, and and I won this battle of getting Genius on the list. And yeah, it was like I would put it amongst the more classic ones, but I also think it is one that is sort of easily forgotten in the canon, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like, did they play this a lot? I know you said you watched it, but I swear I almost never saw this one come up when we were growing up because I don't also even hear a lot of people our age mention it, which is weird. Um, it feels like oh god, there's a name for like that effect or something. Is that the Mandela effect? I don't know.
Yeah, the one where it's like we've all collectively forgotten or remember certain things, and it suggests that the timeline has been messed with. Thank you, Barry
Yes,
Allen.
yes, that one. That's what it kind of feels like because I feel like you and maybe like one other person I've heard talk about it, and then like everybody else, nobody ever discusses it. But who knows? Maybe when people listen to this, they'll be like, "Oh my god, I remember." Like I love that movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very I don't know. I think that I personally identified with it a lot when I was little because I just had a similar not similar, that's crazy. Like I'm not a child genius prodigy. Like that's not what I was. But I think the basic concept of, sort of like knowing that you have a talent, but it also feeling like it ostracizes you from your peers, or just feeling like you don't belong next to your peers. It was something that I related to very strongly, especially in the realm of like
Mm-hmm.
intelligence. um and that's probably why it stuck in my head the way it did. But I guess before we give too much away, uh I should probably let folks know about the story that we're talking about today.
Yes, give us a fun little recap.
All right. So, Genius came out in 1999, and it is the story of Charlie Boyle, who, when we meet, he's on the ice rink, in his skates, and he's sort of like having fantasies of playing hockey professionally. We just basically get the idea that he loves hockey. Um, and his dad comes out, and we see that his dad is a Zamboni driver, and so we kind of automatically have an understanding that it's a working class family. And his dad is essentially like, yo, get off the ice, I gotta run this Zamboni machine, and I need you to help me do it. You can't just go out and play yet. Like, I need you to help me do it because my back hurts. And Charlie takes out a device that he's invented that essentially immediately smooths the ice using, I think he says that it uses a combination, like it's something to do with atomic friction that allows the ice to just sort of like recalibrate itself right away. So we understand the boy is intelligent. We understand that he's pretty much a genius. But because he then leaves and goes to play street hockey, and he's really excited to his dad because he's like, I think today's finally going to be the day that they let me play. And it's because he's invented like this special puck that also plays against friction and therefore is almost like a floating puck. Like it just is super, super smooth on the concrete. And because of that, like the kids who seem reluctant to let him play are like, okay, fine, you can join the team. But he's so excited and he keeps like talking about all this stuff, and we can tell that the kids are clearly annoyed, so they kind of bench him. And we understand that, all right, so we've got this kid Charlie who's clearly very, very smart and has a lot of things going for him in certain realms, but on the other side is maybe missing out on the peer-to-peer connection that he also clearly craves. He doesn't like to be sort of weird, if or just unaccepted. So we go back to his place, and essentially he's gotten into mad colleges. He's 13 and he's applied because, again, super smart, and he's gotten into like the Harvard, the MIT, the Caltech. He also applied to the University of Northern Wisconsin, and his dad is like, for why? We have all these other options, and they're all giving you scholarships. And he's like, well,
his dad is so confused.
he's so confused. He's like,
he holds that Harvard letter so gently.
He's like, baby, this is supposed to be the come up. Like, I know you're a child still, but come on. But Charlie's essentially like, hey dad, I love hockey, I love science. The lab of this particular university is directly underneath the hockey rink, and the scientist working there, Dr. Krickstein, is someone who I deeply respect. He's working on trying to find the graviton, which is what I want to do as well. So I really want to work with him, and that's why I want to go to Northern. So his pops is like, all right, fine, bet. He goes to Northern, and we can see like the hope in his eyes, like he thinks it might be great. But he gets there and he pretty much understands, first and foremost, that lab is like real broke. They broke. And it's cold because it's directly under the hockey rink, and it has to be cold in order to keep the particle accelerator from overheating. And that's the particle accelerator is essentially the machine that they are using to attempt to find the graviton. And he's living on the dorm, which questionable. I don't know if they would let a 13-year-old, even if they are living on campus, room with other people.
No, they would definitely put you in a single.
Yeah, like that doesn't seem to make much sense to me. But he's rooming with a few of the hockey players who are like, oh, like who's this weird little freak? No. And they like move out. It's really sad. And then he's supposed to be teaching classes as part of his scholarship. And in the classes, the children act out, like not children, the college age people act out and like throw things at him and are just blatantly disrespectful, which I would argue college students don't do. But it's television, right?
Right.
We're trying to get a laugh. So it seems like things are going to be the same as they've always been for him until he meets this girl, Claire. She's skating on the hockey rink, and he just like instantly sort of falls for her. And when she asks him his name, he starts to say Charlie, and then sort of hears in his head, like he's been talking about his woes with Dr. Krickstein, who he works in the lab with. And Dr. Krickstein's like, bro, like if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, like how are you going to expect to get different results? Like maybe you got to try something new. So in this moment, he decides to try something new and try to just be someone new. So he invents this person named Chaz Anthony. And he tells Claire that he goes to her school, Franklin Middle School. And he ultimately ends up enrolling there, sort of get closer to her, but also just to like, he's like, all right, like I'm going to try being out this dude. And he shows up and we see that Chaz is in his head the antithesis of what Charlie has been, or the antithesis of, a nerd. Like he takes his glasses off and, he's always, flicking his hair, and he's disruptive and a bit of a class clown and a bit of a troublemaker and all of that stuff. And he makes the other kids laugh a lot. And he, the first day, like manages to make, 2 new friends. And that's, so he's like, oh, like this is great. And he decides essentially to continue living a double life, because he's at a college, you can do that. So he goes to college and then he, goes to class at the middle school and sneaks off between the two. And to get closer to Claire, he also pretends to be sort of dumb and like flunks a lot of his subjects at school so that she'll tutor him. And as she's tutoring him, like they just start to kind of hit it off because like he is funny and clever and all of those things, and it seems like things are going great until a prank puts him in a situation where one of his teachers decides to take the class on a field trip to see the local college student who is their age. And he's like, oh no, that's me. So he essentially has to play like being two people in one place situation. It's a whole thing where he's in a wheelchair with purple skin. He ends up being thrown across the stage. Except just hijinks ensue of him trying to hide the fact that he is not who he says he is to these kids, because Claire is also the daughter of the hockey coach, of the college hockey coach. So he knows who Charlie is and what he looks like. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, he's still working with Dr. Crickstein, like trying to get this graviton situation together. On the night of the big hockey game that is between the rival school and Northern, Dr. Crickstein leaves him alone in the lab and is like, aren't you gonna go up to the game? And he's like, no, there are too many people up there who like know about Chaz and would like think I was Chaz, so I can't do that. So he stays down there, and he essentially gets to a point where he's like, I can go up to the game for 5 minutes just to see. And when he goes up to the game for 5 minutes, like his friends recognize him and they're like, come hang out with us, da 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 da, etc. And he essentially just ends up staying up there for way too long. The particle accelerator overheats underneath the hockey rink, which causes the ice to like break in this sort of hell opening up beneath you scene. And it happens 2 minutes before the game is over, and their team was up by like 2 points, so they were finally going to beat their rival for the first time in like 2 decades. And now the game has to be postponed. The coach is mad at him and like the dean are mad, and the players are mad at him because they're like, dude, we were about to win this game. Like, you screwed up stuff in the lab and now we won't. And then Claire and his friends are like super upset with him because they're like, why were you lying to us? Like, was this some big experiment to you? You think we're a joke? Like, you think we're so dumb? Like, whatever. So he essentially has everything, loses it all in one catastrophic moment. And then is sad about that for a little while and is trying to figure out how he can fix it. While he's trying to figure that out, and his friends like they're just not interested in dealing with him. Claire's like, don't talk to me ever again. He ends up like having a situation where him and his lab partner essentially figure out quantum entanglement. That's not what they call it, but that's what happens. And they figure out how to like literally enact it on like they test it out with these 2 rubber balls, and they realize that they can like create an algorithm and put it on the ball so that like when one ball does one thing, the other ball does the same thing. And Charlie essentially realizes that he could use this to ultimately maybe win back some favor with the hockey team, or just set things right. I don't even think he wants to win back favor because he knows that he can't tell anybody about it. But the whole reason that they can't beat this rival team is because they essentially cheat themselves, and they like push the ref down so the ref can't see when they hurt people on the other team. And Charlie is like, oh, if I entangle their skates with my skates, I can stop them from being able to enact the moves that would allow that to happen. And he recruits the help of Claire and his 2 friends, who are reluctant at first, but he does like a semi-heartfelt apology, and they're like, oh, okay, cool, because they're children and short attention spans. And they work together to at the rescheduled game just keep the other team, the rival team, from, by cheating themselves, they keep the rival team from also cheating as they have been. And they managed to not only get the team to win the game, but I guess in that process discover the graviton because people are floating. And so Charlie wins at the end of the day. Charlie wins all things, and it ends in a really sweet like thing where he's on the ice playing with his friends, and we see that like, oh, okay, like now you get to play in the game, like, because they like you. And then the hockey team comes on, and they're like, we heard about what you did for us. And he's like, how'd you hear? And realizes Claire told her dad. And they're like, that was really cool. Like, we should all scrimmage on the ice together. And that's the end of Genius.
Yes, so we'll be right back with the review. So, to get into the review side of things, I do think that one thing in this movie that we both liked is that it kind of like, I feel like it's like a classic in terms of, like, you need to be yourself. Like, don't pretend that you're something else, as we saw with Chaz and Charlie and him trying to be two different people. Like, it's never going to work out well. You know, it may work for a bit, but at some point you're going to get caught up.
Yeah, the lies and deceit will always catch you.
Yeah.
The general important lesson for everyone to know.
Exactly, because he was doing very well for like at least a good 2-3 weeks there.
He was.
And then he messed it up unknowingly, because then his teacher was like, well, I got a bad kid. Let me show him to a good kid. That was literally the line of thinking, which I love so much.
Yeah, I love that. Like, foiled by, and I love that it was literally a teacher who was like, "You're so bad. Like, you put so much effort into being bad that I know that you are intelligent."
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like that's not something that, like, there was a period of time where I sort of worked with younger kids when I was like in, like, let's say I was working with like middle school kids when I was in like high school, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, and they were kids who, like, you know, it was in a special program and they were like, you know, tapped as very intelligent already. But like, there were many times where I even remember having specific conversations with like, the kids who were in my charge and being like, I actually know that you are capable of getting better grades at this because of how smart your mouth is when you respond to me. Like,
you're telling on yourself.
Exactly. It's like, and I think that is something that, like, I mean, like, it kind of comes up in films, but I don't know if we see it very, very often. Like, we see a lot of the, like, oh, I just don't know that I'm smart, but not necessarily a lot of, like, someone who, like, is so smart that they've realized that they literally don't have to try. They're just like, I actually, and, like, they already know the game, so they're not going to play it. And I just appreciate acknowledgement of that child, because that child is more common than I think we acknowledge.
Yeah, and I do think it does bring up a bigger thing that I feel like people don't always recognize, like you're saying, and I think especially with like young Black boys, especially, where it's like sometimes when kids are like distracted, not all the time, but I think sometimes and many times actually, when kids are like not paying attention or just being like nuisances in the classroom, sometimes that just means that they're literally bored because this is basic material for them, or they feel like they already know it and maybe they need something more challenging. And I feel like it's very easy to overlook that in things, because sometimes it's also because the other reason where it's like they feel like they don't know what it is, and that's why they're making, you know, being more nuisances. But sometimes it's literally just because they're like, I get it, so I'm bored, so now I'm just going to make everybody else, you know, laugh and stuff because I am bored. You're not doing anything for me. So I feel like that's just like an interesting part of education that I feel like it's hard to identify. So like I do feel for teachers, but I do think it is something that is especially overlooked when it comes to like Black and brown kids, especially, where I'm like, sometimes, you know, maybe it's like, maybe we should just give this kid a test, because they might literally just be bored because they already know all this stuff and you're not doing anything for them. You need to give them something more challenging.
Yeah, and I do think that there was, because it's weird, because I'm thinking about, that's literally the opening premise of Smart Guy, the TV show.
Yeah.
Like, when they talk about why he's at the high school in like the first episode, they say something along the lines of like, he was acting out in the 5th grade. You know what I mean? Like, he was being a problem in the 5th grade, and they figured out it's like literally because he's too bored. Like, we need to put him somewhere where he will be challenged.
Right.
And I think that there was and it's a very strange thing, because I think that there was a period of time, like when I was really little, that I sort of remember a rhetoric around that. The concept of like watching out for kids who are expressing their extreme intelligence through non-obvious ways. Right? But I think something, I can't know the specific, like I don't know the specifics of it. I'm not going to pretend that I do. But I will say that I think by the time that I was like 11, 12, right? I know in my, like, I remember that the conversation very heavily stopped being about, or like that was significantly less a part of the conversation around like finding proper places for kids. And the conversation was significantly more about learning differences and ways of accommodating people that learned differently, which I can like, they kind of live in the same wheelhouse, but they are sort of they're distinct problems. And I think that again, I don't know the why of it. I don't know how much it's something that resulted from significantly more diagnoses, or if a lot more diagnoses were a result of this shift. I'm not 100% sure on the timeline of it, but I do know that I stopped sort of hearing about, oh yeah, maybe that maybe that kid just needs to skip a grade, that sort of
Rhetoric.
approach. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it just kind of went out of, I don't know, earshot, at least for me.
No, I would agree with that. I actually wonder if it has something to do with the No Child Left Behind initiative, because when we were
I wasn't
11,
gonna
that was
say
when
that.
that was really hitting its like peak point around
Yeah,
sixth,
yeah,
fifth, sixth grade for us, when they were really
yeah,
introducing that. And I wonder if Bush and the administration had language in there specifically towards people that learn differently.
yeah,
And that might be why things sort of shift, or there became more of a spotlight on that,
yeah.
compared to, previously in American education. Because I do feel like, yeah, when we were younger, I don't really recall anybody really talking about like learning differences other than the Cosby Show where Theo had dyslexia, and that was like a big thing
It
because people
was.
weren't talking about it then, especially if you were Black and in the 80s. Like,
Yeah, they did on the DL Hughley show too. I remember. I used to watch that, and I just remember that was a whole storyline. It was a big deal, and he had
yeah.
inherited it from DL Hughley. His son had inherited it from him, and it was like that whole thing.
Yeah, and I feel like that's probably also, I wouldn't be surprised if No Child Left Behind was also part of that like shift.
Yeah,
Um
and I'm
but
not saying and I have no opinion. It's a good thing that we are paying attention to people with learning differences and making spaces for them. I would be curious to know to what extent people because I know I have public school teachers in my family in New York City, and they have very strong thoughts about what the DOE is doing right and is doing really wrong when it comes to sort of elevating or looking to sort of push children with potential
mm-hmm.
versus versus the idea being that the focus on those with different needs is so strong that those with potential might be getting ironically enough left behind, or just not given the same sort of pushes and spaces that will encourage them to
Maximize that potential.
excel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um
That is very interesting, and I know New York is I know everybody's at odds because they got y'all learning new math and
listen to me.
there's
We could do a whole
shit
episode
going on in the
on
New York education system.
listen. We could do a whole episode on new math and how it don't make no damn sense, but well, let me not personally digress too far.
Yeah,
Bear
gosh,
too much for myself.
It is so crazy, but I'm also I feel like this is the end result of us being so focused on standardized testing. So that's my personal theory.
Say it one more time for my people in the back.
That is
For those
my
with the
personal
headphones
theory.
on low.
We are way too focused on standardized testing, and it is making everybody not learn as so much as trying to learn a specific test that's not going to actually help them out in life or
When a
shows that they know
child
anything.
when a child who scored some crazy number comes to me and can't multiply,
Good Lord.
but was able to get 100 on the math section of a standardized test, I'm like, this is actually nonsense. And that is what happened. I watched that happen with years of children.
Oh no.
It was actually crazy, but
yeah. Overhaul the American education system. We're always all for that. But anyways, back to Gene.
Exactly. I think it's a natural segue,
it's
right?
related. It's definitely related.
He's teaching classes. This show is also a commentary. This film is also a commentary on the American school system.
Yeah.
I think to a basic degree. Not really. It's really more about this boy and learning to accept himself. But
And finally getting to play hockey.
Yeah, this is all he ever wanted.
It's truly it. It is truly it. I think something else that you and I had talked about that was interesting is that this group of films that came out, starting with Under Wraps being the first one, in literally the 90s until I would say like 2000, very much felt like capsule films in that they could have been in theaters.
Yeah.
Like it very much felt like they could have, they felt very much like self-contained films, not self-contained Disney Channel original movie for TV films.
Yeah.
And you can tell the difference because it's like between this, Smart House, Halloween Town, like all of them. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if, like, instead of making those for TV, if they had, like, slightly punched up the script a little bit and made the world a bit bigger. If they had just put that straight into theaters, because kids would have gone and watched it. It looks exactly like a lot of the other like low to mid budget movies that were around at that time for children. Like the Beethovens, your Airbuds, all that.
Yeah. And then like Disney had its own sort of, like, I think the one that like we were thinking of, we put it in the same category as things of like George of the Jungle, you know? And
Brendan Fraser version, guys.
yeah. And I really forget, like, why did they remake? Anyway, moving on. Yeah, like, I just like, why is that something that you think you need to remake? And like Man of the House, that one with JTT.
And Chevy
like it
Chase.
Liz, yeah, it Liz in those, in the place of like, there was just this period of time where Disney was making like like pre-teen-ish films. I would argue that like Freaky Friday, when they did like the Lindsay,
oh my
Lindsay
God, I used to
one,
love
like that
movie.
was like a follow-up of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like every now and then Disney gets into this mood of like, we got to get the big kids back,
right?
Or like the preteens back. And I think that sort of the 90s was 100% a period of time of that, and probably spurred by the fact that they had such a chokehold on toddlers and small children that they had money to spare. But yeah, it just they feel different, and the thing that also really stands out to me is that it feels like they don't know the formula yet. Like they don't know what's gonna, like, what works for what we will call a DCOM, like what works for the TV film on Disney Channel yet. So they're less willing to skimp on certain things. Like that's how it felt to me. Like it feels when I watch it. It's like they're less willing to say, "Oh, but we know the costume design doesn't have to be great."
Right.
Oh, like we know that the script doesn't have to be great. Like, like they have less of that. And they probably sort of treat it more like a real entity. And that is what allows it to live in that space of feeling a lot more sort of cinematic.
I will say also with this one, Genius specifically, you can tell because of, I actually think the set design was pretty good. The production design was pretty good.
It feels like they shot on location.
Yeah, it does. It very much feels like they literally went to a college and were like, we're going to take over your ice rink and we're going to use some random spare room and turn it into a lab that's supposed to look broke down. So it does very much feel like they shot somewhere in location, probably in Wisconsin. And also I do feel like you could see it in the end when they literally have the kid from the opposing team floating. And then also Emmy Rossum and Charlie are floating too.
And they have like a floating kiss in the sky.
That was not cheap at that time to have those strings, and then for you not to see the strings that they're floating with. Like I was like, that they spent money on that, and for the green screen.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, you guys spent money on this. Like I don't know how much, but this was at least like you probably spent more on this than you spent on some random 2009 DCOM. Like
hell, maybe on the Descendants.
No, I think they actually spent a lot on the Descendants. That's kind of
no. I know they did. That's the real sad part of
that. Yeah, they probably spent more than they spent on Twitch.
I could see it. Well, no, because they had to pay Tia Tamara. I'm sure that was not a small feat.
True. And they had to buy that Porsche.
And they had to buy.
I'm just never gonna forget that Porsche because it was just so unnecessary.
It really was. It really was.
But
But I appreciate that it exists. I will say, I appreciate that it exists.
But yeah, I think you can tell that they like spent you could this and that there was care put into it, which we always bring up, but like you really can tell when somebody puts like care into a film, especially into a decom. Because I'm like, some of y'all, you're giving me foster child.
I mean, some foster children are very deeply loved and appreciated.
Not in a rude way, but just like
no, but I feel you. This like reminded me of to make it to come full circle with it, since Emmy Rossum is in this. Like I don't know if any of you have ever seen those episodes of Shameless where DCS comes and takes the children away, and they all end up in various foster homes that are all not great. It's like those foster homes that Emmy Rossum has to, rescue the children from.
Yeah, it's very much giving uncared for, left alone film. Like it's just kind of like a machine. I think by a certain point it did just become a machine though. Like where they were just like, all right, we have this set of writers who are trying to like write for the first time. Let's put them on decom and just drill it out. Like,
yeah.
So I definitely think, but you can tell when that shift happens, and it kind of happened early on. Because I think it just became a bigger thing than they were expected.
And I think, but I always find it interesting to just like consider the fact that like the reason that it might have become a bigger thing is because of these films that were like more unique, and more sort of cared for. And I just always find it interesting the way that like these mechanisms of societal development work, where it's like the thing that makes something special and makes people drawn to it is often its uniqueness. And then, especially in capitalist societies, the simple fact that people are drawn to it makes people choose to repeat it over and over again in order to make a dollar. While the deep irony being that the more and more that you repeat it, the more formulaic it becomes, the less and less interesting it becomes to the general populace.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We definitely had they whetted our appetite for sure, and then went in for the kill smartly on their end. So yeah, I do think that's just an interesting side of it. I always find the low to mid budget film market is interesting in general. And I actually think because of where we are with technology and cameras and all that, we really don't have a lot of them anymore.
Yeah,
if you take out Hallmark, Lifetime, all those non-union networks and stuff, like we really don't have those anymore now, because especially on the film side, like it just costs so much in indie film these days.
Which is kind of, I mean, we've talked about it on the podcast before. Like, there's a level to which I kind of lament that, and I think that people in the industry also lament that. Not necessarily the idea, because like you still can make them, and they can be very like beautiful and well done, but more so that the business side of the industry is no longer interested in taking chances on those things. And they think that people like won't respond to the lower quality camera and all of this other stuff. So like the act of creating film is just becoming more and more and more and more expensive, which is, I don't know. Like I have thoughts on it. There is a chance that we are creating a bubble that's going to pop, because as it becomes more expensive, people have to pay more for it. And like, I don't know, like how long is that actually gonna last?
The empire is falling.
It's like that, that Morgan Freeman film.
Which one? Olympus Has Fallen?
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. Like they made a bunch of them. It's like,
yeah, they did.
Strangely very successful.
It had action in it. That's all people really care about, I've realized these days.
It's true. No one wants to think about the real state of the world because it's just depressing.
It's very depressing. They're just like, I would like to see this white man fight an alien or whatever they're fighting in that one. I honestly don't know, guys. I've never seen it. And Morgan Freeman is president, I think, or something.
Yeah. And I don't know if
Um,
it's aliens or just like really well coordinated terrorist attacks. I think it's that. I feel like I
okay.
watched it, but I don't remember the intricacies.
I might have been thinking about Independence Day.
Lives in the same place. Lives in the same place. You're not wrong for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody's just like, I actually would like, I can't personally run around and blow things up, you know?
Right.
So I just like to just watch it happen because this is how I feel. I feel like the world is crumbling around me. And when I watch another New York City skyscraper fall, it's a reflection of that back to me.
Oh God.
Like, thank you, Avengers, for that.
Oh my God. They've changed the entire landscape of everything, I think, as we talked about in was it Phantom of the Megaplex? I feel like we had a whole conversation, or one of them.
Yeah.
One of them we had a. You guys will hear it. You'll remember. But I want to say it was Phantom of the Megaplex. We talked about how much everything has changed.
Yeah. But it's interesting. Like, I mean, it's not interesting. It makes sense, but I do like. I feel like whenever we do watch these older ones, though, this is something that sort of comes up to one degree or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I don't like. I think that it says something about you and I as viewers as well. And our relationship to, and I mean, potentially just like what it is to be just a transitional spectator or consumer of anything. Like we very much grew up in a transitional time, and therefore, like, we just have like perspective. Like I can imagine talking to kids today and them being like, but the stuff looks better.
Right.
In the same way that like you could have talked to us when we were 10 and we were like, but the new Star Wars looks better, even though it's bad. Like the new Star Wars looks better and Anakin is hot. Like I would have probably said something along those lines so I got older and actually participated in film and understood that other things were true. But yeah, it's just I don't really have a breadth of consideration on it because I haven't thought it through. But I think it says something about us as viewers of this material.
You know what I feel like definitely isn't some technical movie term or anything. I feel that before, I don't know what year I want to pick, but let's say like 2006-ish, movies tended to have more of a charm. I don't know if that's how I would pinpoint it, but like that's the closest word I'm thinking of. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I think I understand.
Yeah, it's not obviously like a formal cinephile term or anything, but that's just like I guess the best way I can put it at this point is it's like I feel like movies had more of a charm to them that I feel like we're kind of missing now from a lot of movies. I think you get it at times, and that's normally when a movie will do really, really good outside of the superhero movies, of course. But I'm just saying, like they don't really have that like the je ne sais quoi, to quote the French. But I don't think they have like that same type of charm anymore. And that's kind of what it feels like sometimes that we're missing. Because even if you watch like stupid rom-coms, like I was just watching this weird one with Cameron Diaz and called the Sweetest Thing or something. On Amazon Prime. I don't recommend it. It's from like 2003. Anyways, and I watched it because I have Prime and it's and it still had that charm though. It had like the exact like that same just like thing that I'm like I don't feel like we have that anymore, and it's weird. And I don't know where that necessarily went. Because I don't know where it came from or what caused it, but it's like I feel like there was just something that was happening for quite a while, and then I don't know if it was the HD just kind of exposed things literally that it kind of the movie magic kind of went away for a lot of films.
Yeah, I mean, I do definitely think it's that. Like you brought like I haven't watched that rom-com and I don't intend to. Please don't. When you brought that up, what I thought of immediately is I thought of Sweet Home Alabama.
Oh yeah.
It's a film that like there's no reason for me to enjoy that film as much as I do. Like, absolutely none. I have no, like, doesn't she literally like live on a? Not, she pretends that she lives on a literal plantation.
I
Like,
think
isn't
so.
that like it's a straight up plantation?
Also,
But
the Tiffany scene in the beginning.
it's all very. It's actually, when you think about it, it's actually a fairly problematic film. But I still love that movie, right? Like, I loved that movie, and there was something about like the goofiness of this love story, right?
Mhm.
But I, like, what it made me think about too, and like, I think it is a technological thing, but I think it's also like, and this might be because of the technology, like the technology became so good, and like you were then capable of making things with such high production quality that people now, like, what I feel is that we also are in a time where everyone's kind of taking themselves a bit too seriously. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like, everybody's trying to make an Oscar winning film.
Yep.
And it's like, some stories are like, that's not what it is. Or even if they're making, even if it's like a rom-com, it's like it's rom, but we're trying to comment on like this thing of the psyche and this thing in society. Like,
Mhm.
it's like,
Mhm.
even like the comedy is very aware of what it's trying to say
Mhm.
in a way that I don't necessarily know if was the case previously. And I think that allowed for a playfulness. Like, I would say it's charm and it's a playfulness that you don't feel as often anymore. Like, and it becomes something that I love. Like, I remember we discussed, Ryan Johnson is not one of my favorite directors. Like, I don't like many of the things that he has directed, but I loved Knives Out.
Yeah. No, Knives Out was
And
great.
and when we walked out of Knives Out, I think I remember even saying to each other something along the lines of, he was having so much fun.
And you
Like,
could
that,
tell.
yeah, that movie was fun. Like, he was playing, and he plays, like, that's his whole thing, is that he plays with genre, he bends genre. But like, this was fun versus the other times, to me it's always been like too serious and too heavy and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
But this was
Mhm.
him just messing around, and that's the one that he, gets all the noms for. Like, I think that it's almost like, it's weird. It's like, it's almost Shakespearean, right? Like, I remember being like first learning about theater and plays and stuff like that when I was a kid, in English class at 11. And the big thing about Shakespeare that was always sort of communicated was like, Shakespeare is playing all the time.
Mhm.
And when you're able to fall into that with him, like, that's the challenge for modern English speakers, is to be able to fall into that with him. But once you do, like, you understand, like, even his most serious plays are funny as all hell.
Mhm.
Like, he's always playing. And I would argue, like, that is the charm that has allowed Shakespeare to survive the way that Shakespeare has survived.
Mhm.
Because yes, like, he played well, was intelligent and all of that, but like, you feel like you can go into it and always find something a little new.
Mhm.
Um and I
Mhm.
don't know if the formulaic nature, or what feels like the formulaic nature of film now, it doesn't feel like there's room for that.
No, I think that's actually a very good point. That actually brings me to what I feel like caused this shift. Dark Knight Returns. Or Dark Knight Rises.
The-
Whichever
yeah,
one Heath Ledger was
I
in.
was
You
like,
know,
the
I
dark the
don't
dark
okay, so
knight.
I don't really
It's
mess
the
with the
I
superhero
know the
films.
Dark Knight.
We've
There's
discussed
nothing else
this.
on the
The
other side of
Dark
it.
Knight, the one with Heath Ledger. That
Yeah, the Dark
everybody
Knight.
has seen it. Everybody has seen it.
Nolan's Batman trilogy. Yes.
Yes, the last one. Or the one with Heath
No,
Ledger.
no, no. That's the middle one. The
Oh,
Dark.
sure. Okay. So whichever one has Heath Ledger in it right before he passed away, and it was like his great role. He was the Joker. That
Yeah.
one. I feel like that is when I noticed things completely shifted, and suddenly everybody was like, "Oh, let's get longer and let's make things darker." Because I feel like before then, nobody was making freaking 2-hour movies unless you were making a Lord of the Rings, a Harry Potter, or something where it was like a super genre film that it made sense. And then I
Yeah,
swear after that one, it was suddenly just like,
but the super genre films were making mad money, and
right.
people
Yeah,
started
I'm
to
not saying
like
it wasn't an
take those.
economic thing. It
Yeah,
definitely was.
I'm agreeing. It was an ad. Sorry, I used the wrong conjunction sometime.
It's
sometimes.
okay.
I do. Sometimes I'll be like, no, yeah, that was exactly what I mean. Like it's really bad. Or I say but when I mean and. It's really terrible.
But yes, I feel like after that was like when the tides turned, I
Yeah.
feel like. And I was like, because I want to say that was one of the first ones, one of the first superhero films that they got a lot of nods from
Yeah,
the
and I think
Academy.
that's what it was. It's like
Yeah.
that's a huge part of it is that like these genre films became sort of not like they became much more standard because people realized the psychology of fandom
Mm-hmm.
and how like
Mm-hmm.
people will keep coming back even if you don't produce something as good, like people develop loyalty and deep relationships. It's also it's also the sequel syndrome. Like
Mm-hmm.
we develop like they realize the psychology of us developing very deep relationships with content, and that has made the amount of content that like not the amount of content that's produced, but the methodologies of producing content feel like they have become sort of narrower.
Mm-hmm.
In not in terms of literal mediums, because that has definitely broadened, like you make a
Mm-hmm.
podcast, you can do whatever, but the actual sort of the things that get picked up, the stories that people are interested in telling, and the ways in which those people, like those powers that be that have the money to make this a viable living for anyone, their range of interest seems to have shrunken considerably.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I feel like a lot of it just, yeah, everything just kind of shifted and what was expected became very different than what it was before
Yeah.
then. And I feel like we're still feeling the repercussions of that. And then also Marvel came up like I think the next year. Didn't Iron Man come out in 2009? 2008?
Yeah, it was.
It was
Yeah,
in
it was.
that
Yeah,
area of time. Those 3 years.
maybe 2 years after the Dark Knight.
Yeah, it came out around that time. So I feel like it was like not gradual. Like it was a very quick, like, oh shoot, we got something on our hands. And next thing you
Yeah,
know, now everything is a superhero film. So that also changed everything as well. But yeah, no, I do feel like it's very interesting. I do feel like we're missing that playfulness, like you said, and that charm is just gone for
and
a
it's
lot of
not that it
things.
doesn't exist. That's also it's not that it doesn't exist, but it's not. It's like you got to go to Sundance. You know what I mean? And most people can't go to. No, most people are never going to see the things that end up at Sundance.
Right.
It's like the things that are being exported and that are being sort of like heightened and celebrated is very narrow. Like you can go out and find the gems, but you have to be willing to go out and find them.
Mm-hmm.
You have the
Exactly.
time and the leisure and the luxury and the privilege to be able to go out and find them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So yeah, I feel like the accessibility has changed and what's getting made has changed. But with that, Nina,
Back to the
we
film
completely
ahead.
veered off of Genius.
I like to think it all comes back full circle, like in the great, like masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
At some point this will, like actually never mind. I'm talking on my ass. I think you were about to ask me a question.
I was going to ask you, would you show Genius to your kids?
I think so. I mean, I feel like I forgot. I didn't remember how genuinely entertaining it was.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I liked it, but I didn't, as opposed to say like Stepsister from Planet Weird, right? Where we watched it and I was like, oh wait. Like I know I liked this as a child, but literally what is happening?
What am I watching?
This is actually quite not what we need at all. Like this to me still really held up. And I don't know, it's weird because it's like I just don't I think that I would show it to my kids, but I really couldn't tell you the context in which it would happen. And if it never happened, like if I never showed it to my kids, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not mad that it exists, and I'm actually quite like happy that it exists. I think it's a fun little movie. But like, I do also understand why it may have been forgotten in the general conversation about these films, because like it has very little. It feels like those movies that Disney was making. It does feel like if someone brings up Kazam, you're like, oh, Kazam,
Right.
but you don't think about, like, you're not, when you're thinking, you're not like, oh, you know what I'm gonna show my kid today, Kazam. Like, it's, unless you really loved that film, like, it lives in that place of like, these were things that we enjoyed, but they don't necessarily age with us, and they can be a fun time capsule to like go back and just be in that space for a moment, but they're not something that we might seek out again. And I think that that's where I live with this film.
Yeah,
What about
I
you?
understand that. Yeah, I would say similar. Like I'm not anti it, but it's not one that I would be clamoring to show the kids or whatever. Be like, you have to watch this. It's like if they saw it on Disney Plus or something, then I'd be like, oh yeah, sure, if you want to. Like cool.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I would be like, you have to watch this. Like this was a great film of my day or whatever. But yeah, so I feel like I'm also in that space with you where it's just like it's okay, it's cool, you can watch it, but like we don't have to do it. It's not a absolute must.
Yeah. And I guess with that, we will catch you guys next week.
Bye. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of The Critics Kingdom. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and SoundCloud so you can stay up to date, as well as interacting and letting us know what you guys think on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Critics Kingdom and on Instagram at The Critics Kingdom. We're excited to talk to you again next week.